Hello and welcome to episode 10 of the Dad Nobody Wants to Listen to You About New York podcast. Before I start this week's episode on waste, I wanted to thank Jennifer in New York, who kindly reminded me that in episode 8 about education, I failed to mention the business of scholarships. Private schools offer quite a number of scholarships. Some can be as much as 50% of the fees or even 75% of the fees. There are some scholarships to families which give 100% scholarships. Many scholarships are given to children from disadvantaged backgrounds, and quite a high proportion of these scholarships are given to children from the less advantaged backgrounds in the ethnic community. It's well known that the US military also gives scholarships to spouses of military servicemen, their children and dependents, and indeed grandchildren as well. If you work for the United States Foreign Services, if you're a diplomat or if you have something to do with the government, there are also a whole range of scholarships for private schools available. Also, from my personal knowledge, a lot of very big companies, the United States of America and in other countries, offer scholarships, either full scholarships or partial scholarships, for the senior employers of their companies. And this makes it much easier for people to be able to relocate to different cities or different countries for their business and not have to worry about the cost of schooling. I remember when I was living in Asia, although I didn't have children at the time, some friends of mine did, and their companies paid for the international schools so their children could continue to be educated in their language or follow the curriculum of the country that they'd just left. So thank you, Jennifer, for reminding me to put that record straight. But this week, we're not talking about education, we're talking about waste. As fond listeners to my podcast will know, New York is known for many things, but maybe one overlooked statistic is that nearly 14 million tons of trash is produced by businesses and people in New York City every year. The more cynical amongst us might be forgiven for thinking that much of that seems to be ending up on the streets of Brooklyn and New York. Although I must say that my recent visit to Brooklyn was somewhat marred by the dirt and grime in the streets. I actually thought that New York was looking a lot cleaner than I'd seen it in previous years. So in this podcast, I want to look at the history of sanitation in New York and look at the way forward in terms of recycling. During the research for the podcast, I discovered a lot of very interesting statistics and changed my mind on a lot of things about New York's dealing with trash. Things have moved on tremendously since the 70s, and I think everyone can probably remember in the 80s one of the most defining moments that made New York's trash get straight to the top of the news agenda. And this was the famous Mobro garbage barge. It was known as the Flying Dutchman of Trash, or the Barge to Nowhere. Dan Rather dubbed it the most watched load of garbage in the memory of man, and even Johnny Carson joked about it in his nightly comedy routine. This was 1987, if you were around then, and I do remember this. It was a barge that contained 6 million pounds of New York garbage. It got turned away from its destination in North Carolina, and it spent the next 5 months adrift, rejected by states and 3 foreign countries. It was a classic tale with a twist. It was a get-rich-quick scheme. It changed the way that Americans deal with trash forever. It was a bankrupt businessman called Lowell Harrison from Alabama, and he had decided that he could make some money very quickly by trying to get all New York's garbage sent to his state, where he would actually put it into a landfill. So he got into bed with a mafia who provided him with the funds. He got hold of an old barge, and he tried desperately to do it. But as history shows, it was a total disaster. And in the end, because people alleged that it had medical waste, which they thought was very dangerous, it was refused at everywhere it went. And eventually it went back to New Jersey, where it was, by judge's order, incinerated. It cannot be overstated how significant this moment in 1987 was for the United States recycling and environmental awareness. I think Greenpeace made it particularly famous because they put a great big poster on it saying, "Next time, try recycling." So 2023, yes, things have improved, although I noticed in Brooklyn, where I was staying, in Halsey Street, it was very disappointing that the streets were still pretty dirty and most people didn't bother picking up after themselves. I remember on the way to the Halsey Street subway, there was a car crash and one car back-ended another car. And it caused significant damage to both cars. One car obviously managed to get away, and the other one was completely paralyzed, and I think the owners pushed it onto the sidewalk. For the entire three-week period that we were there, that car remained on the sidewalk in its various states of disrepair. Bits of glass all over the place, bent metalwork, and eventually people who were going past the car started adorning it with empty cups and banana skins and all sorts of rubbish. But the fact that it actually stayed there for 3 weeks, totally disgusting and messy in the street, surprised me that nobody took it away. Clearly, there is a system in Brooklyn for trash collection. Certain days of the week, you're not allowed to park on one side of the road to make it easier for the trash trucks to go along and pick up the rubbish. But other times I was really shocked how so much rubbish just piles up in the streets and how people allow the rubbish to pile up in front of their houses and nobody seems to care. New York has been filthy for a very long time, and the city's garbage problem has never really gone away. It lags behind many metropolises in the world, and I believe at the moment, next to Rome, believe it or not, it is the dirtiest city in the world. So I wanted to look at recycling in New York. I wanted to look at the reason why there isn't much containerization. Why is such a lot of trash on the streets? And why do people seem to have these unique challenges about disposing of waste? What bureaucracy is getting in the way? What roadblocks to change are happening in New York? I decided to look into more detail. I was particularly interested because I know the mayor, Eric Adams. He is determined to try to do something about cleanliness. He's got an obsession with rats. He's got a sanitation commissioner called Jessica Tisch, more about her later, who comes from a very influential New York family. And she's been given free rein to experiment in any way that she can in order to get rid of the garbage in the streets. But first of all, how did we get here with all the garbage in New York? So like many things in New York, we need to go back into history, back to even 1600 and the original Dutch settlers, who used to dump all their rubbish into the nearest waterways. And there was even a big pond called Collect Pond in Lower Manhattan where everything was dumped. Over 200 years, there was very little growth or cohesion in the refuse management in New York City. And malaria, measles, typhoid, cholera, and yellow fever killed thousands of people during this time. It was about the 1840s that sailors said that they could smell New York City 6 miles from the shore. So New York had already become one of the dirtiest cities in the world. And by 1850, with 500,000 people living there, 10 times more than it had been in 1800, pigs were even roaming around the streets, eating scraps. It really wasn't until 1881 that an official department of street cleaning was established. That's 140 years ago. Now, if we fast forward to 2019, sanitation is a huge business. It's the 5th most dangerous job in the US to be involved in. Accidents happen during transportation. I've actually seen some interviews about the sanitation workers who often get cut with steak knives or needles that are left in the bags. It's not a nice job. The New York City Department of Sanitation is now the biggest municipal waste service in the United States of America. It has over 7,000 workers, and it has an annual budget of over $1.7 billion. The system has over 2,300 refuse trucks, and 12,000 tons of waste are collected from businesses and houses every day. It's a massive, sprawling system. It's taken over 300 years of history to build. And not only are the refuse collectors having to deal with waste, they also have to do snow duty as well. And they have to remove the snow from 6,300 miles of streets every year. In the previous years, there were huge amounts of incinerators and landfills in New York City. But obviously now there are no more. New York land is far too expensive for that. Now all the waste that isn't going to be recycled gets sent to a station in Brooklyn at the Marine Transport Station, and it's compacted into containers. Then it's lidded, it's then sealed and loaded onto barges and taken to New Jersey, or put on rail cars from there and taken elsewhere. Of this waste, which is not recyclable, over a quarter is incinerated, and the rest is sent to the landfills in New York, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and South Carolina. It's costing New York City $432 million a year just to export its waste. It's also nice to know that the 1/4 of this waste that is sent to incinerators is actually burned in New Jersey in a special facility that reclaims all the heat to generate power. And I believe this company called Covanta generates nearly 70 megawatts of electricity by burning New York City waste. However, burning this waste is also a problem. It's been a problem since the 1970s, since the Earth Days and the protests in New York spawned the modern recycling movement. Burning this waste in New Jersey releases dioxins, heavy metals such as lead and mercury, and huge amounts of greenhouse gases and hazardous ash, all of that spewing into the air. And naturally, it's people of colour and the poorest people in the community who are going to suffer the most, because it's really the very poor people that are going to be living within any form of distance of these plants. The biggest, of course, is Newark's Ironbound neighbourhood, and decades of protests are still continuing to try and get that plant closed down because of the poisonous pollutants. It's been said that you can see bright pink and purple fumes still coming out of the Covanta plant. Even though Covanta has been found hundreds of times to exceed the air pollution limits and not abiding by safety regulations, it continues to operate to this day. So in the bad old days, all rubbish was just burnt in this way or thrown into landfills. And it really wasn't until 1989 that the first mandatory recycling law was passed by Albany. So now, even though New York City has pledged to get to zero waste as part of its One New York City plan, there is still huge amounts of dumping going on. Staten Island was one of the world's largest landfills. All the New York boroughs used to dump their rubbish there. But now, Fresh Kills, as it's called, is just a grassy, hilly park. It's a landfill that was opened in 1948 and closed in 2001. And over 150 million tons of garbage lies there. Now it's mainly capped, or rather covered in soil, and pumps pump out bad water out of the system for purification. I remember I was in New York City shortly after 9/11, and I was staying with my uncle in Staten Island, and he showed me Fresh Kills. It had become a forensic site for ground zero debris, and nearly all of the debris that was picked up over that period of time from 9/11 was buried in Fresh Kills. So it was reopened for that purpose. But sadly, residents in the area are showing significant elevations in 5 distinct cancer types such as bladder, breast, kidney, thyroid, and Hodgkin's lymphoma. There have been a number of studies to show that this must be caused by all the pollutants coming out of the landfill. But naturally, like everything else, New York City Council has its own story. It believes that the rise in the incidence of cancer is just because of the scare, and therefore many more people are being tested, so more is being diagnosed. This doesn't sound a very honest approach. As a result of this, Staten Island has been called the Forgotten Borough. Even though it has over 500,000 residents, it has a lower poverty rate and a higher household income compared to much of the city. It is also less diverse. It has 60% whites compared to 32% for the city as a whole. So it's a loud community, but they're still blighted by the threat of cancer and disease from years of dumping landfill. So what about recycling? Well, now more than half of New York City trash is recycled. From a perspective of the consumer, it's a very easy process, and I spoke to a couple of my friends recently, and they told me that yes, recycling is alive and well in New York City and Brooklyn. The recycling system in New York City is one of the biggest recaptures of waste in the world. It captures, though, still only 50% of what is classified as waste. 50% is still being thrown in the trash by New Yorkers and is ending up in barges. Many residents and businesses do separate their trash. Some do it in order to survive, and I saw many people separating bottles and cans for money. When I was in Williamsburg, near to where my son lives, I was really thrilled to see one of the most fantastic things, and it's called the Williamsburg Bottle Bin. It came about because in 1982, a bottle bin law was passed, which imposed a 50-cent fee on single-use containers. The Williamsburg Bottle Bill is a fantastic facility. It allows canners, and that's the name given to the community of people, many of them homeless or poor, who go around New York City and Brooklyn and the other boroughs collecting tins and bottles, and you see them carrying them around in supermarket trolleys in great big clear plastic bags. They have this place where they can actually go and they can get cash for their separated tins and glass. But not only that, the Williamsburg Bottle Bill also offer all sorts of social services for these people, as well as storage facilities for their rubbish and clothes, food, medicine, all sorts of things. It's a wonderful thing to see. But mayor after mayor, not least the latest, Mayor Adams, have said that they're going to get serious about recycling and that things are going to improve. But to be honest, from my research, things are mainly stagnant. As a resident of New York, you will probably have a blue bin, which is for metal, plastic, cartons and glass. There is a penalty if you do not sort out your rubbish. There's $100 for the first offence, $200 for the second offence, and $400 for the third offence. But the trouble is that most people in New York are renting, and these fines are levied against the owner of the building. So it's not a great disincentive to people. As a result, quite a few people are not separating their trash at all. A relatively rare sight, but one we hope will change, are the brown bins. A third of all that is thrown away is actually food scraps and food-soiled paper. This is a voluntary bin at the moment because there is really no curbside system that's fully working in order to be able to collect food waste. It's very important that this thing is actually sorted out because it has been promised by 2024-25 that all these brown bins will be in circulation. But at the moment, the brown bins are not there, so all the food waste is mixed in with the trash. And of course, that's unhealthy, it's smelly, and it attracts Mayor Adams' famous rats. But the good news with the blue bins, over 1,000 tons a day is processed, 6 days a week, 24 hours a day, and it's baled and sorted into plastic waste or paper waste. But as I mentioned, only 50%, which is about 680,000 tons of stuff, is recycled. And the problem is the consumers are still confused. The strange situation in New York, which is almost exclusive to New York and no other city in America, is that all rubbish costs are included in your tax. There's no extra charge for sorting rubbish or for taking it away. They're starting to use the brown bins, and this compost is collected. Again, it's dumped at the moment in Staten Island. So New York prides itself, quite rightly, as a city that is sustainable, but when it comes to the trash and recycling, it still has a long way to go. And as much as the New York government pledged to get to zero waste, you really have to increase participation rates and you have to scale up the amount of places that are actually recycling. Sadly, if you see environmental issues like recycling as a profit concern, as they do in New York, we're never really going to get there. Mayor Adams, for all his talk about the environment, cut 18 million from the composting program and has delayed it substantially. It does cost a lot of money to recycle, and you have to pay the sanitation workers who are earning $45,000 on average a year. But equally, there have been all sorts of studies done that show that if the state really did get into composting and New York City really did put these brown bins in front of people's houses, you could save, according to the city's independent budget office, over $35 million a year. Really, the only way to get to a zero trash or zero waste utopia are the 3 R's, and they are to reduce the amount of rubbish that we produce, try to reuse the rubbish that we produce, and recycle as much as possible. One of the greatest problems in New York City, and my son pointed this out to me, he lives in Brooklyn in fact, is that New York just wasn't built for trash. Every square inch of New York is worth a lot of money, so there are no back alleyways behind houses where you can put trash trucks or big dustbins. So everything is always piled up in the street in front of the homes and the businesses. And then this has to sit around, even though there are strict laws about when you can actually put your trash outside your house. I think it can't be there before 8 o'clock at night, but people don't always obey that. But one of the wonderful success stories that I learned about happens on Roosevelt Island. And it's a system that was modeled off Walt Disney's Magic Kingdom, where you have trash pneumatic tubes under the street that transport the rubbish from people's houses and businesses to a central collection place. The trash is put into these tubes and it's like a huge, great big vacuum, and it sucks them along these tubes, and then it goes to the central collection agency where they actually sort the rubbish, and it's treated then just like all the other waste in New York. It gets sent off and it's either turned into a landfill or it's incinerated or collected as recyclables. The system has been working for years in Roosevelt Island, and if you talk to people there, they love the system. Trouble is, it's quite a complicated system. Quite often the tubes get blocked, not least because people try to shove things down the system that shouldn't be shoved down the system, such as beds or chairs. And to try to roll out a system like that now in New York City would be nigh on impossible, because there's just too many tunnels, too many cables, too many services under the streets of New York. And it would be just virtually impossible to put a system like that in now. This AVAC system, or vacuum assisted collection system, that's been in place since 1974 is really a fantastic idea, because it means there's no trash in the streets, there's no dustbins, there are no rats, and it's a system that's working really well in places like Norway, Sweden and Spain. The good news is that the AVAC system is actually being installed at the new Polo Grounds development in Harlem by a Swedish firm. And the New York City Housing Authority is giving it a chance. It's going to be a $31 million system, which is going to serve 4,000 residents, and it's going to be completed next year in 2024. If the system works, it could at least show the way forward for New York City, and it would mean that you would no longer need trash collection either. It will just go straight into the system directly from the houses and the businesses. Another innovation that's coming from Mayor Adams is that he wants to try to change everyone from plastic bags to containers. Now, the biggest problem with plastic bags, according to Mayor Adams, is that the rats can bite their way in and go through the trash. But solid containers with solid tops mean that the trash will be kept safe from rodents, but also free of smells. So these new food containers are going to be mandatory for businesses effective from the 30th of July this year. It remains to be seen if that's being enforced. But of course, I wanted to find out why waste management is still so far behind in New York. It's not surprising, but it's predicted by 2029 that the waste disposal business Landfills will be worth $239 billion. Many private companies are involved in landfills, and they're making huge profits. It's estimated now that nearly 80% of all landfill capacity in the United States is privately owned. You may think, well, how are you making money from this? Well, they charge tipping fees, and this can be as much as $80 to $100 a ton in the east coast of New York. These businesses are involved in landfill mining and reclamation. So everything that's put in there, they separate, they see if they can recycle and make money reselling it in terms of metals and other things. They also are turning landfill gas into energy, or methane, and selling it as an energy product. Two main companies dominate it. They are Waste Management, or WM, and Republic Services. Waste Management has 293 landfills, and Republic Services have 186 landfills. And the rest, 2,627, are still owned privately, or the few owned municipally. But it's a fantastic business to be in. The stock prices for these two companies, Waste Management and Republic Services, have seriously outperformed all other stocks in the stock market. Prices have doubled in the last year for their stocks. So if business is so booming for companies that are getting rid of waste in a very unenvironmentally friendly way, you wonder then, what is the real incentive to go zero waste? Mayor Adams in April 2023 launched a sustainability drive as part of his Plan New York City. It's very interesting. If he can actually succeed in this, then hopefully the waste management of New York will improve. Jessica Tisch, who's his sanitation consultant, is also speaking well about what she's going to do to reduce waste in New York. But it seems to me that what we can do to improve matters is to try to get rid of rats, which is true because, as those who've heard my episode on the MTA will know, rats are everywhere in New York, and they're a particular problem in the subways. People just leaving their rubbish outside their houses is also a serious problem, and it was quite amusing that in the last few weeks Taylor Swift got into the headlines because outside her plush Tribeca apartment, she was on world tour, all the rubbish was being piled up in the street, and she was receiving fine after fine for breaking the regulations about sorting and dumping rubbish. But it's true that many people in New York just believe they're too busy to pick up rubbish. The city badly needs to get a grip and get its composting plan back on schedule. We need to get those brown bins in front of everybody's house, sealed lids, so all the food waste cannot be eaten by birds or rodents. The smells won't be in the environment, and then we can actually compost this stuff and seriously save a lot of money by not having to put it through the waste system. At the moment, most public housing don't have any form of convenient recycling bins. This needs to change. Politicians need to get way tougher. They need to require way more recycling, and they shouldn't be frightened of the cost. These fines that are put on to the owners of buildings for not recycling properly are useless. They're not really effective. And most of the people in New York, as I said earlier, are renters and are not affected by these fines anyway. Businesses really need to be fined because they're not recycling as much as they should do either. The way that garbage is picked up by the crews also needs to be looked at. They're all highly unionized. That's not their fault, but ultimately they're under huge financial and time pressures. They have to pick up huge amounts of trash, and they've got to do it within their hours of work. This means inevitably, and it's been seen and recorded by a number of people, that they just mix the recycled garbage back into the trash and shove it into the back of their trucks because they just don't have the time. And then, of course, people see that and they think, well, if the people picking up our trash then just mix it all back in again, then why should I be bothering to recycle and put it separately? Another slight problem at the moment is that the market for recycled products is not that strong. And again, one of the modern problems and a thing that's creating a huge amount of waste is what's called the Amazon effect. This is where people are ordering even single items like a bottle of shampoo and it comes in a box which is wrapped in a piece of plastic. Most people are using Amazon now, so it's generating a huge amount of cardboard and waste. And really as a society, and that's myself included, as my wife will note, need to do something about that. If you're going to use something like Amazon that delivers to your door, try to order far more than just one item at a time. So at the end, I want to give the final word to Cara Napolitano. She is the Education and Outreach Coordinator for Sims Municipal Recycling.
The 3 R words in order of importance are reduce, reuse, and recycle. Recycle is third on that list. It is important, but it is not in itself a solution. So we should all be reducing first. We should just be using less stuff across the board. It's not just using less plastic, it's using less of everything.